John D. Rockefeller was an American industrialist and a complex business figure who became one of the most controversial entrepreneurs of the Gilded Age. John Davison Rockefeller, oil magnate and later philanthropist, was born in Richford, New York on July 8, 1839. He came from a modest family. He had a distinctive appearance with his reserved demeanor and penetrating gaze. Rockefeller's early years were marked by ambition and determination. He attended Central High School in Cleveland, Ohio, though he never completed a college education, choosing instead to pursue business training at Folsom's Commercial College. His education there shaped his understanding of accounting and commerce, though his later career would test those lessons in the most competitive ways imaginable. After completing his business training, Rockefeller began his career as an assistant bookkeeper at Hewitt & Tuttle, a commission merchant firm in Cleveland. He earned 50 cents a day. Despite the modest wages, he proved himself to be meticulous and hardworking. His attention to detail and his ability to manage accounts impressed his employers. It was during this time that Rockefeller began developing his ideas about business efficiency and systematic organization. In 1859, at the age of 19, Rockefeller went into business for himself. He formed a partnership with Maurice Clark, establishing a commission merchant business dealing in grain, hay, and meats. The firm of Clark and Rockefeller prospered during the Civil War years, as demand for provisions soared. Rockefeller demonstrated an early talent for business, carefully managing costs and maximizing profits. The venture was successful, but Rockefeller was already looking toward bigger opportunities. The discovery of oil in western Pennsylvania in 1859 had created a new industry, chaotic and speculative. Rockefeller watched the oil boom with interest. He recognized that while oil drilling was risky and unpredictable, oil refining offered more stable opportunities. In 1863, Rockefeller and Clark invested in an oil refinery in Cleveland. The venture initially showed promise. Cleveland was well positioned for the refining business, with excellent railroad and water transportation connections. However, Rockefeller and Clark disagreed about the direction of the business. Clark wanted to focus on their original commission merchant business, while Rockefeller believed the future lay in oil. In 1865, Rockefeller bought out Clark's interest in the refinery for $72,500. It was a bold move that would define his future. He renamed the company Rockefeller and Andrews, partnering with his brother William and chemist Samuel Andrews. Rockefeller's refining business grew rapidly. He was a better manager than most of his competitors. He focused obsessively on efficiency and cost reduction. He employed chemists to extract every possible byproduct from crude oil, selling everything from kerosene to petroleum jelly. He negotiated relentlessly with railroads for lower shipping rates, using his growing volume as leverage. He reinvested profits into expanding capacity rather than taking large personal distributions. By 1868, Rockefeller's refinery was the largest in Cleveland. Yet Cleveland itself had dozens of refineries, and the industry nationwide was plagued by overcapacity and cutthroat competition. Prices fluctuated wildly. Many refiners operated inefficiently. Rockefeller believed the industry needed consolidation and organization. He envisioned bringing order to chaos through systematic combination of competing firms. In 1870, Rockefeller and his associates formed the Standard Oil Company of Ohio with a capital of $1 million. Rockefeller owned about 30% of the stock and served as president. Standard Oil was incorporated to bring together several refineries under unified management. The company controlled roughly 10% of American oil refining at its formation. This was just the beginning. Rockefeller had far more ambitious plans. He believed that by consolidating the refining industry, he could eliminate waste, reduce costs, and stabilize prices. His vision was not universally shared. Many independent refiners valued their autonomy and resented the idea of combination. Over the next few years, Rockefeller embarked on an aggressive campaign to acquire competing refineries. His methods varied. Sometimes he offered attractive prices and convinced owners to sell willingly. Other times he used more aggressive tactics. He negotiated secret agreements with railroads to receive rebates on his shipping costs while his competitors paid full rates. He sometimes received rebates even on his competitors' shipments, a practice called drawbacks. These arrangements gave Standard Oil enormous competitive advantages. Competitors who refused to sell often found themselves unable to compete and were eventually forced out of business or compelled to sell on unfavorable terms. The campaign reached its peak in 1872 during what became known as the Cleveland Massacre. Within 3 months, Rockefeller acquired 22 of his 26 competitors in Cleveland. Some sales were voluntary, with owners recognizing the inevitable and accepting Standard Oil stock. Others felt coerced, believing they had no choice but to sell. By the end of 1872, Standard Oil controlled nearly all refining capacity in Cleveland and about a quarter of the nation's total. The consolidation continued beyond Cleveland. Rockefeller systematically acquired refineries in New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and the oil regions of Pennsylvania. By the late 1870s, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of American oil refining. It was an unprecedented level of market dominance. Rockefeller had achieved his vision of bringing order to the chaotic oil industry. Standard Oil operated with ruthless efficiency. It eliminated redundant facilities, standardized processes, and achieved economies of scale that independent refiners could never match. The company could undersell any competitor and still make profits. It controlled pipelines and storage facilities. It had preferential relationships with railroads. It was, in effect, a monopoly. Rockefeller's business practices generated intense controversy. Independent oil men despised him, seeing him as a ruthless monopolist who destroyed competition. Journalists and reformers attacked Standard Oil as the epitome of corporate abuse. Ida Tarbell, whose father had been an independent oil producer, wrote a devastating exposé of Standard Oil's practices in McCleo's magazine in the early 1900s. Her series, later published as The History of the Standard Oil Company, portrayed Rockefeller as a cold-blooded predator who built his empire through deception and intimidation. The public image of Rockefeller as a robber baron was solidified. Yet Rockefeller himself saw his actions differently. He believed he was bringing rationality and efficiency to a wasteful industry. He argued that the consolidation of refineries eliminated duplication and reduced costs, benefiting consumers through lower prices. He pointed out that kerosene prices fell dramatically during Standard Oil's rise, making illumination affordable for ordinary Americans. He believed competition in refining had been destructive, leading to boom and bust cycles that hurt everyone. In his view, he was a builder and organizer, not a destroyer. This self-perception never wavered, even as criticism mounted. The legal structure of Standard Oil evolved to match its growing reach. In 1882, Rockefeller and his attorneys created the Standard Oil Trust, a new form of business organization. The trust brought together Standard Oil's various companies, which had been incorporated in different states, under unified control. Stockholders in the individual companies exchanged their shares for trust certificates. The trust was managed by 9 trustees, with Rockefeller holding the most influence. This structure allowed centralized management of a far-flung empire while navigating the legal constraints of state incorporation laws. The Standard Oil Trust became a model that other industries would copy. The trust structure also made Standard Oil a target. Reformers and prosecutors saw the trust as a dangerous concentration of economic power. Several states brought legal actions against Standard Oil. In 1892, the Ohio Supreme Court ordered the dissolution of the Standard Oil Trust, ruling that it violated state laws against monopolies. Rockefeller's lawyers restructured the organization, creating a holding company arrangement. The legal battles continued for years. Meanwhile, Standard Oil's dominance of the oil industry remained largely intact despite the legal challenges. Rockefeller's personal life during these years was marked by the same discipline that characterized his business career. He married Laura Celestia Spellman in 1864. The marriage was happy and produced 4 daughters and 1 son. Laura, known as Seti, shared Rockefeller's Baptist faith and his commitment to frugality despite their growing wealth. The Rockefellers lived comfortably but not ostentatiously by the standards of the Gilded Age wealthy. Rockefeller neither smoked nor drank. He attended church regularly. He maintained a strict daily routine. He was, in his personal habits, the opposite of the flamboyant robber baron stereotype. Throughout his business career, Rockefeller was also a systematic philanthropist. He had been taught from childhood to give 10% of his income to charity, a practice called tithing. He maintained this practice as his wealth grew, though the amounts became staggering. In his early years, he gave to his Baptist church and to various religious causes. As his fortune expanded, so did his philanthropy. He gave to educational institutions, medical research, and various social causes. His giving was methodical and carefully considered, much like his business decisions. He sought to make his philanthropy as efficient and impactful as his business operations. In the 1890s, Rockefeller gradually withdrew from active management of Standard Oil. He had accumulated a fortune estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars, making him the richest man in America and possibly the world. He was in his 50s and his health had begun to suffer from the stress of managing his vast enterprise. He suffered from digestive problems and insomnia. His hair fell out, giving him the bald appearance that would characterize his later years. He began spending more time at his estates in New York and Florida, leaving day-to-day operations to trusted associates. By 1897, he had largely retired from business, though he remained the largest shareholder in Standard Oil. Retirement allowed Rockefeller to focus on philanthropy. He had already been giving away substantial sums, but now he approached charitable giving as systematically as he had approached business. In 1901, he founded the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which would become Rockefeller University. The institute supported groundbreaking research in medicine and biology. In 1902, he established the General Education Board, which worked to improve education, particularly in the American South. The board provided funding for schools, teacher training, and educational reform. In 1913, he created the Rockefeller Foundation, which would become one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. The Rockefeller Foundation's charter was ambitious, to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. The foundation supported public health initiatives, scientific research, arts and humanities, and social sciences. It helped eradicate hookworm in the American South. It supported the development of a yellow fever vaccine. It funded research that led to the discovery of penicillin. It supported universities and libraries around the world. Rockefeller's systematic approach to giving away his fortune was as revolutionary as his approach to building it had been. He pioneered the concept of scientific philanthropy, using wealth to address root causes of social problems rather than merely treating symptoms. Meanwhile, Standard Oil faced its greatest legal challenge. In 1906, the federal government filed suit under the Sherman Antitrust Act, seeking to break up the Standard Oil monopoly. The case, Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus United States, worked its way through the courts for 5 years. The government argued that Standard Oil had violated antitrust laws through its monopolistic practices and its restraint of trade. Standard Oil's attorneys defended the company's efficiency and argued that its size resulted from superior business practices, not illegal conduct. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled against Standard Oil in a unanimous decision. The court found that Standard Oil had engaged in unreasonable restraint of trade and ordered the dissolution of the company. The breakup of Standard Oil divided the company into 34 separate entities. These included companies that would become Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others. Rockefeller owned significant shares in all the successor companies. Ironically, the breakup made him even wealthier. The individual companies prospered and their stock value soared. By 1913, Rockefeller's fortune was estimated at close to $1 billion, an almost incomprehensible sum at the time. He was likely the wealthiest person in modern history when adjusted for inflation. Yet the breakup of Standard Oil was a bitter defeat. The company he had built over 4 decades had been forcibly dismantled. His business methods had been condemned by the highest court in the land. Rockefeller's public image during these years was terrible. He was portrayed in political cartoons as an octopus strangling the nation. Muckraking journalists depicted him as the embodiment of corporate greed and abuse. The public associated him with monopoly, ruthlessness, and the exploitation of workers and consumers. Even his philanthropy was attacked as an attempt to whitewash his reputation or to ease a guilty conscience. The criticism wounded Rockefeller, who believed he had been a force for progress and efficiency. He rarely responded publicly to attacks, maintaining a dignified silence that some interpreted as arrogance. To improve his public image, Rockefeller hired Ivy Lee, one of the first public relations consultants. Lee advised Rockefeller to be more visible and accessible. He encouraged him to give interviews and to be photographed engaging in ordinary activities. Images of Rockefeller playing golf, handing out dimes to children, and attending public events began to soften his image. The dime giving became particularly famous. Rockefeller carried rolls of dimes and distributed them to people he encountered, often with a brief word of advice about saving and thrift. The gesture was both genuine and calculated, reflecting his belief in frugality while also humanizing him to the public. In his later years, Rockefeller lived quietly at his estates. He spent winters at his home in Ormond Beach, Florida, and summers at his estate in Pocantico Hills, New York. He played golf regularly, believing it contributed to his health and longevity. He continued to monitor his investments and his philanthropic activities, though he relied increasingly on advisors and his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., to manage both. He read extensively, particularly enjoying biographies and religious texts. He maintained his daily routines with the same discipline he had shown in business. He attributed his longevity to regular habits, moderate living, and faith. Rockefeller's wife Seti died in 1915, a loss that deeply affected him. They had been married for 51 years. She had been his partner and confidant, sharing his values and supporting his endeavors. After her death, Rockefeller became more reclusive, though he maintained relationships with his children and grandchildren. His son John Jr. took over management of the family's philanthropic activities and proved to be as dedicated to giving away the fortune as his father had been to accumulating it. The Rockefeller philanthropic legacy would extend through multiple generations. As Rockefeller aged, public opinion about him gradually shifted. The passage of time softened memories of Standard Oil's controversial practices. His massive philanthropic contributions became more widely recognized and appreciated. Universities, hospitals, and research institutions that bore the Rockefeller name stood as tangible evidence of his generosity. The Rockefeller Foundation's work in public health and scientific research saved countless lives. His support for education, particularly for African Americans in the South, was acknowledged as progressive for its time. While critics continued to argue about whether his philanthropy could redeem his business practices, many came to see him as a more complex figure than the simple robber baron caricature. Rockefeller lived to an extraordinary age. He celebrated his 97th birthday in 1936, surrounded by family. He had outlived most of his business contemporaries and critics. He had witnessed the transformation of America from an agricultural nation to an industrial powerhouse, a transformation his oil empire had helped fuel. He had seen the rise of the automobile, which created demand for gasoline and made his successor companies even more valuable than Standard Oil had been. He had lived through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. His fortune had survived and even grown through all these upheavals. On May 23, 1937, John D. Rockefeller died at his home in Ormond Beach, Florida. He was 97 years old. The cause of death was arteriosclerosis. Rockefeller's funeral was private, attended only by family members. He was buried beside his wife at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, not far from where he had built his oil empire. In death, as in life, Rockefeller was remembered with a mixture of respect and controversy. His legacy is complex and contradictory. He was a man of genuine business genius who transformed an entire industry. He was ruthless in competition yet generous in philanthropy. He destroyed competitors yet created efficiencies that benefited consumers. He accumulated the greatest fortune in American history yet gave away most of it. He was vilified as a robber baron yet pioneered modern philanthropy. He was deeply religious yet engaged in business practices that many considered unethical. He was both builder and destroyer, benefactor and monopolist. Modern historians have offered varied assessments of Rockefeller's career and legacy. Some emphasize his business innovations, his creation of the modern corporation, and his contributions to industrial efficiency. They note that Standard Oil brought order to a chaotic industry, reduced costs, and made petroleum products affordable and widely available. They acknowledge that his philanthropic contributions have had lasting positive impacts on education, medicine, and scientific research. Other historians focus on his monopolistic practices, his destruction of competitors, and his role in creating dangerous concentrations of economic power. They argue that his business methods harmed competition and innovation, and that his philanthropy, while substantial, cannot excuse his business conduct. Perhaps the most balanced assessment recognizes that Rockefeller was a product of his time, operating in an era of minimal business regulation and intense industrial competition. His methods were often harsh by modern standards, but they were not illegal under the laws of his time until antitrust legislation was passed and enforced. He was more systematic and successful than his competitors, but he was not unique in seeking to eliminate competition and dominate his industry. What made him exceptional was the scale of his success and the thoroughness of his methods. He took the logic of industrial consolidation to its ultimate conclusion, creating a monopoly that controlled an entire industry. Rockefeller's philanthropic legacy is perhaps less controversial than his business career. The institutions he founded and supported have made genuine contributions to human welfare. The Rockefeller Foundation's work in public health alone may have saved millions of lives. His support for medical research contributed to breakthroughs in treating disease. His funding of education expanded opportunities for countless individuals. His model of systematic, strategic philanthropy influenced other wealthy individuals and helped establish the modern foundation as an institution for social good. Whatever one thinks of how he acquired his wealth, there is little dispute that he gave it away effectively. In the end, John D. Rockefeller was neither a simple hero nor a simple villain, but rather a complex figure who embodied both the achievements and the excesses of American industrial capitalism. His legacy includes both the creation of Standard Oil and its forced breakup, both the accumulation of unprecedented wealth and its systematic distribution to charitable causes. He is remembered today primarily for his business dominance and his philanthropy, which is perhaps appropriate for a man who excelled at both accumulation and distribution. Rockefeller remains, even decades after his death, one of the most significant and controversial figures in American business history, a man whose influence shaped both the industrial economy and the philanthropic landscape of the 20th century.